The grand auditorium of the University of Ouagadougou buzzed with anticipation. Over 800 students filled every seat, their voices creating a symphony of excitement and curiosity. Banners reading "Leadership in the New Africa" hung from the ceiling, and camera crews positioned themselves strategically around the hall. Dr. Aminata Sawadogo, the university's rector, stepped to the podium, her voice cutting through the chatter. Dr. Sawadogo, students, faculty, distinguished guests, today we have the honor of hosting a leader who has captured the world's attention. At just 35 years old, he has transformed not only Burkina Faso, but inspired a generation across Africa. Please join me in welcoming President Ibrahim Traoré. The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. From the wings emerged a young man in military fatigues, his bearing confident yet humble. Traoré raised his hand in acknowledgement, a slight smile playing on his lips as he approached the microphone. Traoré, thank you, Dr. Sawadogo. Thank you, students of this great institution. He pauses, scanning the crowd. I stand before you not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who, like many of you, dared to ask difficult questions about our continent's future. The applause subsided, and an expectant silence fell over the hall. Traoré, today we speak of success and inspiration. But let me be clear, true success is not measured by international approval ratings or Western media headlines. It is measured by the dignity restored to our people, the resources returned to our communities, and the hope rekindled in the hearts of our youth. A student in the front row, wearing a Harvard University sweatshirt, raised her hand eagerly. Traoré, yes, please. Student Fatou, Mr. President, thank you for being here. I'm Fatou, studying international relations. My question is about sustainable development and partnerships with developed nations. Traoré, please go ahead. Fatou, how do you balance Pan-African ideals with the practical needs of economic development? Don't we risk isolation by rejecting proven Western models? Traoré, nodding thoughtfully, Sister Fatou, you raise an important point. But tell me, what do you mean by proven Western models? Are you referring to the same models that kept us exporting raw materials for decades while importing finished goods at 10 times the price? A murmur of agreement rippled through sections of the audience, while others shifted uncomfortably. Traoré, partnership, yes. But partnership must be based on mutual respect and benefit. When France was taking 14% of our GDP through the CFA franc system, was that partnership? When our uranium-powered French nuclear plants, while our own people lived without electricity, was that development? From the middle section, another hand shot up. A young man in designer clothes and expensive sneakers stood up without waiting to be called upon. Student, Kevin, Mr. President. Kevin Ouedraogo, economics major. His voice carried a challenging tone. With all due respect, sir, you didn't come to power through democratic elections. In the West, this is considered a coup, a military takeover. How can you speak of legitimacy when real legitimacy comes from the ballot box? Shouldn't we be following democratic processes like established nations? The auditorium fell dead silent. The tension was palpable as hundreds of eyes shifted between the young challenger and the president. Camera operators zoomed in, sensing the pivotal moment. Traoré stood completely still for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped away from the podium and walked closer to the student section. Traoré, speaking softly, but his voice carrying clearly through the microphone. Kevin, thank you for that question. It's a question that deserves a complete answer. He paused, looking directly at Kevin, then scanning the audience. Traoré, you speak of democratic elections. Tell me, Kevin, were the elections that brought Roch Kabore to power truly democratic when French advisors were writing his economic policies? Were they legitimate when international mining companies were deciding our budget priorities before our parliament even saw them? Kevin, slightly defensive. But sir, that's how modern governance works. We need international expertise, foreign investment. Traoré, raising his hand gently, please, let me finish. You ask about legitimacy from the ballot box. I ask you this. What legitimacy did that ballot box have when the real decisions about our country's future were being made in boardrooms in Paris and Brussels? He moved closer, his voice growing more passionate but remaining controlled. Traoré, Kevin, I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're drowning and someone throws you a rope. But as you climb up, you realize the rope leads not to safety, but to a cage. Do you keep climbing because it's the proper way to get out of the water? Or do you find another way to shore? Kevin, but sir, coups destabilize. Traoré, interrupting gently, my brother, let me share something with you. When we took action in September 2022, it wasn't because we hungered for power. It was because Burkinabe were dying. Terrorists controlled 40% of our territory. Our soldiers were fighting with equipment from the 1960s, while our government spent millions on luxury cars. The audience was completely captivated now, hanging on every word. Traoré, you know what happened the day after we took power? Within 24 hours, ordinary citizens, farmers, teachers, market women brought us gold jewelry, their savings, anything they had, to support our military operations. Was that ballot box legitimacy, Kevin? Or was that something deeper? Kevin, his voice softer now. I understand the circumstances were difficult, but... Traoré, Kevin, I'm not finished with my story. That rope I mentioned? Sometimes you have to cut it to save yourself. But cutting the rope isn't the end. It's just the beginning. What matters is what you do once you reach the shore. He turned to address the entire auditorium. Traoré, in 18 months, we've increased our territory security by 60%. We've established local production facilities that have created over 50,000 jobs. We've reduced youth unemployment in rural areas by 35%. Our literacy programs have reached 200,000 adults. We've built more schools and health centers in the last year than were built in the previous 5 years combined. The audience began to stir with murmurs of approval. Traoré, turning back to Kevin, now tell me, brother, should we have waited for a perfect democratic process while our people continued to suffer? Should we have held elections while terrorists were burning schools and killing teachers? Kevin, hesitating, no, but what about international law? The international community's concerns? Traoré, a slight smile playing on his lips. Kevin, let me ask you something. When Libya was destroyed in 2011, was that international law? When France intervened in Côte d'Ivoire in 2002 and 2011, was that respecting sovereignty? When American and European companies extract billions in resources from Africa while our people remain poor, is that justice? He walked back toward the center of the stage. Traoré, the same international community that condemns us for taking control of our own destiny applauded when we were being exploited. They called it stability when we were stable in poverty and partnership, when we were junior partners in our own exploitation. Kevin, voice almost a whisper, I hadn't thought of it that way. Traoré, Kevin, I don't blame you for asking these questions. In fact, I respect you for asking them. You know why? Because these are the questions that every thinking African must grapple with. The question isn't whether we follow Western models or reject them entirely. The question is, can we create something that serves our people's needs first? A female student in the back raised her hand. Student, Aisha. President Traoré, I'm Aisha from the philosophy department. If I may build on Kevin's question, how do you respond to critics who say you're just another military ruler in Africa's long history of coups? Traoré, Aisha, that's an excellent question. Let me tell you what makes us different. Every previous military leader in our region promised change and then enriched themselves. They built palaces while people lived in poverty. They sent their children to study abroad while local schools crumbled. He paused, his voice becoming more personal. Traoré, I still live in the same modest house I lived in before taking power. My children attend local schools. My salary is public record. It's less than what some government ministers use to spend on their monthly phone bills. When international dignitaries visit, we serve local food prepared by local cooks, not imported delicacies. Aisha, but how do we know this will continue? How do we know power won't corrupt you like it has others? Traoré, nodding appreciatively, Aisha, that's the most important question you can ask. And here's my answer. Don't trust me. Trust the system we're building. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. Traoré, we're establishing popular assemblies in every village and district. Real decision-making power is being decentralized. We're training local leaders, not appointing foreign consultants. We're building institutions that serve the people, not international donors. He moved to address another section of the audience. Traoré, but most importantly, we're raising a generation of young Africans who know their worth, who understand that being African is not a limitation to overcome, but a strength to embrace. Kevin, who had been listening intently, raised his hand again. Kevin, President Traoré, I owe you an apology. And I have one more question. Traoré, no apology needed, Kevin. What's your question? Kevin, how can young people like us, especially those of us who have been educated in Western systems, how can we contribute to this vision without feeling like we're betraying our education or our international connections? Traoré's face lit up with a genuine smile. Traoré, Kevin, now you're asking the right question. Your education is not your enemy, it's your tool. The problem was never that you learned from the West. The problem was when you learned to see the West as superior and Africa as inferior. He addressed the entire auditorium now. Traoré, use everything you've learned, but use it for Africa's benefit. Study international business, but create businesses that employ African youth. Learn about technology, but develop solutions for African problems. Master international law, but use it to protect African interests. Kevin, but what about the brain drain? Many of us still want to go abroad for better opportunities. Traoré, Kevin, let me tell you something. There's nothing wrong with going abroad to learn. The problem is when you go abroad and never come back, or when you come back and try to turn Africa into a copy of somewhere else. He paused, looking directly at Kevin. Traoré, go to Harvard if you can. Go to Oxford. Go to the Sorbonne. But go as a proud African who's there to learn, not as someone who's there to escape. And when you come back with skills, knowledge, and connections, but keep your African heart. The auditorium erupted in applause. Kevin was nodding vigorously, visibly moved. Student, Marcus. A student from the back shouted without a microphone. President Traoré, what's your message to African youth who feel caught between traditional values and modern aspirations? Traoré, cupping his ear, I can't hear you clearly, brother, but I think you asked about tradition versus modernity? Marcus, louder, yes, sir. How do we balance being modern without losing our identity? Traoré, Marcus, let me tell you something. Modernity is not a Western monopoly. Africa was modern when we had the University of Timbuktu, while Europe was in the Dark Ages. We were modern when we had complex trading systems, spanning continents, while others were just learning to navigate oceans. He gestured broadly to the audience. Traoré, your grandmother's wisdom about community solidarity? That's not outdated, it's advanced social psychology. Your grandfather's understanding of sustainable farming? That's not primitive, that's cutting-edge environmental science. Marcus, so we don't have to choose? Traoré, Marcus, you never had to choose. That choice was imposed on you by people who wanted you to believe that being African and being modern were contradictory. They're not. You can be proudly African and brilliantly modern. You can honor your ancestors and build your future. Dr. Sawadogo stepped forward, checking her watch. Dr. Sawadogo, Mr. President, we have time for one final question. A young woman in the front row, who had been quiet throughout the session, slowly raised her hand. Student, Mariam. President Traoré, I'm Mariam, final year law student. My question is personal. What would you say to young Africans who have lost hope, who look around and see corruption, poverty, conflict, and think maybe we're doomed to never catch up with the rest of the world? The auditorium fell completely silent. This was clearly a question that resonated with many students. Traoré was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Traoré, Mariam, that might be the most important question asked today. Come here, please. Mariam, surprised. Come where, sir? Traoré, up here, on stage. I want everyone to see you when I answer your question. Hesitantly, Mariam made her way to the stage. Traoré offered her his microphone. Traoré, Mariam, tell everyone how old you are and what you're studying. Mariam, nervously, I'm 23, studying law with a focus on international human rights. Traoré, to the audience, look at Mariam, everyone. 23 years old, studying human rights law at one of Africa's leading universities. Mariam, do you think your grandmother had the opportunity to stand on a stage like this and speak about international human rights? Mariam, smiling slightly, no, sir. Traoré, do you think your great-grandmother could have imagined a young African woman studying law, speaking fluent French and English, understanding complex legal systems? Mariam, no, sir. Traoré, turning to the audience, Mariam, you are the progress. You are the hope. The fact that you can ask that question, the fact that you can articulate your concerns about your continent's future, that's proof that we're not doomed. He placed his hand on her shoulder. Traoré, Mariam, when I was your age, I was a soldier thinking about how to protect my village. You're a law student thinking about how to protect human rights across continents. Which one of us is more advanced? Mariam, laughing, I think we're both necessary, sir. Traoré, exactly, Mariam. You want to know why I have hope? Because I see you. I see Kevin questioning Western models. I see Ayesha asking about accountability. I see Marcus trying to balance tradition and modernity. He addressed the entire auditorium. Traoré, every single one of you represents a quantum leap forward from where your parents were at your age. You have access to information, education, opportunities that previous generations couldn't dream of. The question isn't whether you can catch up with the rest of the world. The question is, what kind of world are you going to help build? Mariam, but sir, the challenges seem so enormous. Traoré, Mariam, let me tell you what I see when I look at this auditorium. I see 800 young Africans who speak multiple languages, who understand technology, who are connected to the world, who are asking smart questions about their future. He gestured to the crowd. Traoré, multiply this by every university, every technical school, every community college across Africa. We have the largest and youngest population in the world. We have natural resources that the rest of the world needs. We have cultural diversity that creates resilience and creativity. Mariam, so you really believe we can build something great? Traoré, his voice rising with passion. Mariam, I don't just believe it, I know it, because I've seen it. In 18 months, we've proved that when Africans control their own resources and make their own decisions, miraculous things happen. He turned to the microphone, addressing everyone. Traoré, but here's what I need you to understand. It won't be easy. It won't be comfortable. And it definitely won't be approved by everyone in the international community. Mariam, what do you mean, sir? Traoré, Mariam, when you start succeeding on your own terms, there will be people who try to convince you that you're doing it wrong. They'll tell you that your success isn't sustainable or democratic or internationally acceptable. He paused, his voice becoming more intense. Traoré, they'll tell you that young people can't lead, that Africans need guidance, that your traditions are backwards, that your innovations aren't real innovations because they didn't come from established institutions. Mariam, how do we deal with that? Traoré, Mariam, you deal with it the same way your ancestors dealt with being told they couldn't build great civilizations. You build them anyway. You deal with it the same way your grandparents dealt with being told they couldn't govern themselves. You govern yourselves anyway. The auditorium was completely captivated, hanging on every word. Traoré, success, real success, is not about getting permission. It's about getting results. It's not about being accepted by the international community. It's about creating communities that work for your people. Mariam, President Traoré, what's your final message to all of us? Traoré took the microphone and walked to the center of the stage. Traoré, my message is this. You are not behind. You are not catching up. You are not trying to become something else. You are African, and that is enough. You are young, and that is an advantage. You are educated, and that is a weapon. His voice echoed through the silent auditorium. Traoré, the world doesn't need another America or another Europe. The world needs Africa confident, capable, self-determined Africa. And that Africa starts with you. He pointed directly at the students. Traoré, in 10 years, some of you will be leading governments. Others will be running businesses that employ thousands. Some will be developing technologies that solve global problems. Others will be creating art that inspires the world. Traoré, but all of you will be part of writing the next chapter of the African story. And let me tell you something about that story. It's going to be magnificent. The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause that lasted for several minutes. Students were on their feet, whistling, clapping, some wiping away tears. Kevin, the student who had challenged Traoré at the beginning, managed to reach the stage. Kevin, shouting over the applause, President Traoré, thank you for answering my question with such patience. I came here thinking I knew what success looked like. I'm leaving knowing that success looks like us young Africans who aren't afraid to ask hard questions and aren't satisfied with easy answers. Traoré, embracing Kevin, that question you asked was exactly the question you needed to ask. Don't ever stop asking questions. But remember, ask them from a position of strength, not from a position of doubt about your own worth. Dr. Ouagadougou returned to the stage. Dr. Ouagadougou, President Traoré, on behalf of the University of Ouagadougou, thank you for this inspiring dialogue. I think it's safe to say you've given our students much to think about. Traoré, Dr. Ouagadougou, the honor was mine. But let me say this to conclude. I didn't come here to give you answers. I came here to remind you that you already have everything you need to find your own answers. He faced the audience one final time. Traoré, students of Ouagadougou, the world is waiting to see what you will build. Don't keep them waiting too long. As Traoré left the stage, the standing ovation continued. Students were embracing each other. Animated discussions had broken out everywhere, and the energy in the room was electric. Mariam, still on stage, took the microphone one last time. Mariam, fellow students, I think we just witnessed something special. President Traoré came here and turned a question and answer session into a mirror. He made us see ourselves not as we've been told we are, but as we actually are. She paused, looking out at her fellow students. Mariam, the question now is, what are we going to do with what we've learned about ourselves today? The applause resumed, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just appreciation for a speaker. It was the sound of young people applauding their own potential. As the crowd began to disperse, small groups formed throughout the auditorium. Students were exchanging contacts, making plans, forming study groups, discussing startup ideas. The conversation had ended, but something larger had begun. Kevin found Mariam near the stage. Kevin, Mariam, I owe you a thank you too. Your question about hope, that's what I was really asking about, but I was too proud to admit it. Mariam, Kevin, your question about legitimacy was exactly what needed to be asked. I think that's what real leadership looks like, being willing to answer the hardest questions with honesty instead of avoiding them with politics. Kevin, so what now? How do we take this energy and turn it into something concrete? Mariam, I think we start by being the change we want to see. We stop waiting for permission to be great. We stop apologizing for being African. And we start building the Africa we want to live in. As the two students walked out of the auditorium, still deep in conversation, they passed a group of younger students who had been taking notes throughout the entire session. One of them called out, "Hey, you two were on stage with the president. Can you help us understand something he said?" And so the conversation continued, rippling outward, student to student, question to answer to new question, creating the kind of engagement that transforms not just individuals, but entire generations. The formal session had lasted just over an hour, but its impact would be measured in years, in careers, in policies, in the countless moments when these students would remember the day they were challenged to see themselves not as students of someone else's success, but as architects of their own.